Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is September 12th. Today is day 342 since October 7th. It's been an intense week for me personally in New York City. I'm now back in Washington, D.C. for a couple of days and leave tomorrow. I'll be several weeks on the road. But this morning, there was a live weekly briefing that provided the summaries of the past week's news, particularly in the Gaza Strip, but throughout all of Palestine and Israel. And I'd encourage you, visit us on Thursdays for those live briefings. Ben on our staff team gave that on my behalf today. And it's a good way to learn about a summary of each of these daily videos in terms of what's happening specifically in Gaza, but also in the broader Middle East. Specific updates in the past 24 hours. UNRWA has said that 6 of their staff members were killed in Nuseirat in the refugee camp in central Gaza on Wednesday. That's the highest death toll among UN workers in a single incident, according to the agency. In response, the IDF said that they were able to verify the identities of some of those killed, and they published the names of 9 Hamas operatives, including 2 of whom they said were employees of UNRWA. Now, I'll remind you, if you've been listening to these daily updates, there's been a conversation since October about whether or not some of the staff of UNRWA were a part of planning the October 7th attacks. Israel came out with those accusations right after the ICJ ruling that Israel's actions in Gaza could be genocide. Then UNRWA immediately let those staff members go. Later, UNRWA rehired those workers, did an internal investigation, and some of them were let go later because there was potential evidence. There was an internal investigation. But the claims of these 6 staff members were killed. The idea that they were Hamas, this seems to be new. We've not heard anything about this. The U.S. has called for an investigation on this incident, and so there's a lot of criticism because, of course, the killing of humanitarian workers is illegal by international humanitarian law. The death toll in Gaza is at least 41,118 Palestinians killed since October, and those wounded, 95,125 since the beginning of Israel's war on Hamas. Every day the war goes on in Gaza. This is bad for Israel, it is bad for the United States, and it causes more and more deaths for dozens of people in Gaza, the vast majority of whom are civilians. This also puts the lives of hostages at risk if any of them are left alive. The IDF has said that it located 9 tunnels that cross the Philadelphia corridor from the Gaza Strip into Egypt, all of which are sealed on the Egyptian side from even before the World War began. According to an investigation, the IDF said there's a low chance they could be used for smuggling weapons. I'm glad to read that in the news because we kept hearing about these tunnels and all of the smuggling. One of the main issues that was added to the hostage negotiation was this issues of weapons being smuggled in from Egypt. And just this morning, I had a meeting with the Egyptian ambassador to the United States. We talked explicitly about the Philadelphia corridor, and he was talking about, I wasn't aware that even the security fence that's on the other side, that's in Egypt in the Sinai, the security fence that was built and then completed in the past months, it is 6 meters high, and he said 6 meters under the ground. So these tunnels are completely sealed off, which what I just read was from Haaretz, has been acknowledged. The IDF said there's a low chance weapons could be smuggled in. Gaza, my understanding is that this has not been reported by the news yet, but in the news, in the Arab sources and in sources in Israel, it has been reported that there is a very clear indication that Israel and Netanyahu are preparing for Israel to take complete control over all of North Gaza, all the way to the Netzarim corridor. I'll give more details about that in my update tomorrow, but there are significant concerns in that regard. It had been suspected, but there's now evidence at play seeming to indicate that that is the case. According to OSHA, in August, there were 12,000 trucks going into Gaza that month. 42% were construction materials, 22% were food supplies, 3% were humanitarian aid items facilitated by international organizations. And that was August 2023. I just wanted to share that because that was how much material was needed. 12,000 trucks going into Gaza in the month of August 2023. And the numbers of trucks going in today are just abysmally small in comparison. In the West Bank, a Washington Post investigation published today found that Asenor, Ezgi Agi, the American-Turkish activist who Israel claimed was accidentally killed by the IDF last Friday in the West Bank, was shot more than a half an hour after the height of confrontations. So this idea that she was killed because the IDF felt threatened at the height, of these activists, et cetera, is contradicted by these claims. The preliminary claim by the IDF was that they were firing at the central instigator in a violent gathering. And this investigation by the Washington Post found out that she was shot a half an hour after the height of confrontations. According to the Post, they interviewed 13 eyewitnesses. They reviewed 50 videos and images. IDF soldiers fired in the directions of activists that were about 182 meters away, 20 minutes after protesters had already moved down the road. Citing an ongoing investigation, the report added that the IDF declined to answer questions about why its forces fired towards the demonstrators so long after the demonstrators had already retreated and from a distance where it was clear that they were no apparent threat. Turkey has said it has opened an investigation into Agi's death and that it will seek an international arrest warrant in the case. In terms of hostage and ceasefire negotiations, Moshe, who was released from Hamas captivity in November, Adina is her name, recounted that she saw hostages Ofer Calderon and Yarden Bibas in the tunnel where she was held, that they were kept in a cage. Moshe said that she later asked the Hamas guard to bring them to her. 2 days later, he brought them both for an hour and then returned them to the cage. According to Moshe, Bibas said he did not know what happened to his wife Shiri and their 2 young children. At one point, I went to check with Hamas if Shiri and the children were with them, and he said it would take him time to find out, she added. Prime Minister Netanyahu's office said that Hamas is still trying to conceal the fact that it continues to oppose a deal to release the hostages and it's foiling it, adding that while Israel accepted the final bridging proposal that the U.S. made on August 16th, Hamas refused the proposal and then killed 6 of her hostages in cold blood. In the West Bank, the U.S. State Department approved, well, this isn't particular to the West Bank, but this is specific to the United States. The U.S. State Department approved the potential sale of heavy-duty tanker trailers to Israel, estimated to begin delivery in 2027. The estimated cost is $164.6 million, the Pentagon announced today. In terms of Israel-Lebanon, the IDF reported that 15 rockets were fired from Lebanon at northern Israel. Some were intercepted. Others landed in communities, igniting fires. Israeli fighter jets struck Hezbollah targets in South Lebanon. The U.S. has announced that it is withdrawing the USS Theodore Roosevelt aircraft carrier from the Middle East after it was stationed alongside the USS Lincoln for several weeks following the killing of the senior Hezbollah commander Fuad Shakor and the assassination of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh. One of those was in Beirut, one was in Tehran, which Hezbollah and Iran have vowed to avenge. At the same time, I already mentioned the U.S.'s approval of those weapons. So those have happened at the same time, the withdrawing of forces and then the approval of additional weapons to Israel. Brigadier General Yossi Sariel, a commander of Israeli Army's Elite Intelligence Unit 8200, announced today he's resigning. He referred to this reason because of his personal responsibility for the failure of his unit on October 7th. In Syria, Israeli commandos infiltrated an Iranian Revolutionary Guard facility near Masyaf in Syria. The Israeli commandos retrieved documents, destroyed it, and then withdrew, receiving cover from drones and also gunships. A Middle East analyst, Eva Kouluriotis, posted this on X. She cited security sources. This was actually posted on Haaretz. And reports in Syria said that 2 people were killed there in Israeli drone strikes on the road connecting Damascus and Kenitra. The IDF said that the Air Force attacked and killed a terrorist there, Ahmad al-Jabir, an operative of an organization that's affiliated with Hezbollah. So that's the news from the last 24 hours. I just wanted to close by telling you something fascinating that I learned today in a meeting that I had. Elizabeth Elliot, I'm sure you're familiar. She wrote numerous books. A book that she wrote in 1969 has been buried, and it's very, very difficult to find. But she wrote this book after her reflections on spending time in Israel. The book is called The Furnace of the Lord, Reflections on the Redemption of the Holy City. It was reviewed by Christianity Today. You can find a link to that on their website. A book review in Christianity Today said this: on July 30th, 1967, less than 2 months after the Israelis occupied the ancient city of Jerusalem, these are Elizabeth Elliot's words, "It was my privilege to stand beside the Wailing Wall and witness a little of their intense joy at that traditional site of sorrow. Elizabeth Elliot, the widow of the martyred missionary, who went and converted a whole village. She returned after her husband had been martyred by this village in South America. Then she remarried later in life. She arrived to Jerusalem and spent weeks in the Holy City. And she wrote this book, and it was not well received. And I heard a story today that she and her ministry was actually canceled in the evangelical world because of her conclusions about Israel and this book that was written, in the 1960s. So I wanted to just read a paragraph from this book review in Christianity Today that says this: the major thrust of the book comes out of the third purpose of her trip. I judge Mrs. Elliot was considerably less bowled over by the excitement of the capital of the Jewish state. She expresses her reaction. You go to Jerusalem pro-Israel. You quickly learn that there is another side, and you decide to be pro-Arab. If in your first few days no Jew gives you a seat on the bus and 6 Arabs do, it's hard to remain unprejudiced. Even before she left New York, however, an Israeli girl warned her, you're in for the worst food and the worst manners in the world. Mrs. Elliot tried hard to be objective and dig out of the truth. She visited Jewish friends and she recorded their side of the story. She visited Arab friends and recorded their side. My final impression is that she ended up pro-Arab. Indeed, I would call chapter 16, Make Straight in the Desert a Highway, almost a polemic for the Arab cause. Make straight in the desert a highway. In the chapter headed Zionism, she insists there still remains a question as to whether or not there's any ethical basis for the state of Israel. So I wanted to call this to your attention. It's hard to get a handle on this book, but in my opinion, it was incredibly surprising. I mean, this is food for thought. Elizabeth Elliot is a stalwart, hero in the evangelical world. My understanding is that this book is very, very, very hard to find. But if you would like to hear its content, I'd encourage you to go to the podcast Didomi, Didomi. It's 2023 season. Each session is a reading of a chapter from this book. In Elizabeth Elliot's words, may God redeem the holy city and all of the Holy Land. That's our prayer. May there be an end to all of the violence and killing in Gaza and throughout Palestine, Israel, and all of the Middle East. In the name of Christ, amen.